Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the February garden checklist video. I do one of these for each month. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, zone 7B, and so depending on where you're watching me, if you're in colder areas, you probably want to wait to do some of the things I'm talking about. If you're in warmer areas and you want to do some of these things, it's definitely time. February is a busy month in the garden for me. The ground doesn't freeze solid in my area, and so I can continue to plant throughout the month of February. Any kind of hardy shrubs and trees, I'm definitely putting them in the ground. I've got lots of planting videos right now. If you're doing transplanting, this is a good time of year to be doing that. Bare root plants like bare root roses, great time of year to be getting those things. One thing to watch for is you probably don't want to be acquiring plants while it's still cold that have a lot of new growth on them and put them into the ground. That probably means it came out of a greenhouse and it's just not going to be acclimated to the cold. So be careful with that. But if it's a plant that's been sitting outside at a garden center, probably totally fine to grab it and put it in the ground. It's actually better off in the ground than it is in that container, actually, because the roots will then be protected. Other things we can plant right now, we can still add color to the landscape. There's probably pansies and snapdragons and dianthus and some other color things that we can add in the south that will give us color through the spring until we can plant our summer annuals later in the spring. So February is definitely a busy time in the vegetable garden. I have started broccoli from seed and various lettuces and other greens, beets, kohlrabi. Those things are all started inside of my house. A couple weeks from now, mid-February, I'm going to get those things into the ground. I did a round of cool season vegetables back in the fall, back in October. And they had great crops of broccoli and all of those greens. The coldest part of the winter is kind of taking those things, made mush out of them really. And it's time, but coming up pretty soon, the ground will be warm enough again that I can get started on those things again. What I'll look for mid-February before I put those things in the ground is I'll check the 10-day forecast, make sure there's not going to be anything like in the low 20s. I'll just wait until after that if there is something like that in the forecast. But if the temperatures are in the low 30s, that's just not a problem at all. I'm going to put those things in the ground. I'll be prepared to cover them if we get any severe cold. So I'll have a frost protection blanket or a sheet or a piece of plastic or something that I can put over them overnight if it gets extremely cold. February is going to be the time of year when we're going to start. You definitely want to have hopefully you're acquiring your seed for your summer vegetables and perennials and annuals, anything you're going to do from seed. And then looking at the package and seeing when to start those seeds indoors. Some things can take 6 to 8 weeks before they get transplanted outside. Some things can take only 4 weeks. And so going through your seeds and figuring out when you're going to start those things. By mid to late February, I want to start on my peppers because peppers take one of the longest things from seed to get them ready to go into the ground. And so I don't want to start things too early. But sometime in February, some of my perennials, annuals, and definitely my peppers will get started. I'll probably wait till March to do my tomatoes. Tomatoes only take about 6 weeks. And for me, the day I want to be putting those things in the ground is around April 15th. And so March 1st, I'll start my tomatoes. Anything that's 6 weeks will be in March. Anything that's 6 to 8 weeks, I'll do in February. So, looking through those seed packets, organizing them by the time you actually start the seed is the way I organize them. I put up a video on the channel recently for that. So a few other things I'm doing in the vegetable garden. My once a year recomposting of the garden will happen before I put my cool season vegetables in. So if you're subscribed to the channel, you'll see that coming up. I'm going to put down 1 inch or 2 of compost to start the season off before those things go in the ground. The other things that can go in the ground are strawberries and rhubarb and celery and peas, and there's lots of lots of things that can get planted during the coolest parts of the late winter and early spring. You might want to pull up a planting guide for your area. You can probably pretty easily Google this. If you find out what horticultural zone you live in, like again, I'm in horticultural zone 7B, I can pull up a planting map. Probably the extension service in your area is going to have something that will help you here for the exact timing that you should be putting something in the ground, whether you're doing it from seed, whether you're starting the seed indoors or outdoors, or you're planting it directly in the ground. It will tell you those two different, the timing on those two different things. But definitely studying that here in the next couple weeks, because we're coming up on the time that all those things are the perfect timing for all of those things. I didn't mention starting herbs from seed too. Some of those take longer than others, so again, check the packets on how long it takes to prepare them from seed. Also, I have a potato growing video that I'm going to be putting up soon of my process of growing potatoes from last year, and by the end of February I'll have those potatoes back in the grow bags again for 2021. So February is a big preparation and maintenance month for sure. Like I told you already, I'm going to be putting compost down in the vegetable garden. If I had other spaces that I was going to create during the season or make major changes to, February is a great month to be doing that kind of edging and laying out beds, painting new lines on the ground, basically doing a lot of dreaming and laying the base work for those things, mulching new spaces, and just, like I say, generally preparing for whatever big plans you have for the spring. Definitely the time, and we're getting late to be doing some of the winter pruning that you'd want to be doing. So, dormant trees and shrubs that you want to get under control. This is the time to do those. Pruning back, conifers. You can lightly tip prune your ground cover conifers if you're trying to control your junipers, or you're trying to reshape some sort of little globe cryptomeria or something like that. You can do your pruning on those. It's definitely time to cut the old leaves off your hellebores. I have several videos on my channels for that. All of your woody perennials that you haven't cut back and grasses that you haven't cut back from last year, definitely time to go ahead and take those down and cut them back. I do like to leave those things through the winter. A lot of people don't, but I like to leave them through the winter just because the birds continue to take the seeds. There are some nesting, some things that like to live in the bottom of some of your ornamental grasses and that kind of thing. But it is time, if you don't get them cut back pretty soon, the new growth will come up in them, and then it's really hard to prune them at that point. Be careful on pruning flowering shrubs, because if you don't know what it is, I wouldn't risk it. Just cut them after they flower in the spring. I just did a video on pruning back butterfly bushes. It's definitely time to do those. Lantana, crepe myrtles, don't butcher them, please. But if you do need to, do a little tip pruning on your crepe myrtles, it's time. Anything that blooms on new growth during the season, it's time to prune. Anything that blooms on old growth, it's not. And again, if you don't know what plants you have, you can either Google it to find out when to prune it, or if you can't identify it, just wait until after it blooms to prune it, and you'll be fine. So toward the end of February, you're going to see my once a year fertilizing video. I always use some sort of organic fertilizer and just kind of generally fertilize everything all at once that time of year, and kind of on a light rate. I don't do a whole lot, but that video will go up later in the month. Definitely time to be thinking about that. Be prepared to cover things. Have frost protection blanket on hand, or sheets, or whatever you would have handy, because February is a month where we can start to get some warm nights, and some of your plants may sneak ahead a little bit. Maybe start to bud up, the flower buds are more susceptible to frost and freeze damage. So if you see something that's budded up and you're going to get a really cold night, something in the mid-20s, be prepared to cover those things. So it definitely has not been necessary this winter in my area. It's rained and rained and rained, but if we do get an extended period of dry time during February, do keep an eye on that. Water's a great insulator, and so before it gets extremely cold, you may want to water your containers and think about watering vegetables that you've already planted early, that kind of thing, because again, it is an insulator. So I have a video on my channel of how I built my grow light rack inside, and if you were interested in building something like that, this would be the perfect time. February would be the perfect time to do it, because in March and April you can get all your seeds started for the spring and summer and fall. And that's another thing, you probably want to buy any seeds. This is going to be the best selection of seeds we're going to have for the season. I expect, with the number of people gardening right now, that seeds will be in short supply. I've actually not only bought my spring and summer seed, and that's things like herbs and perennials and annuals and, whatever flowering things, and my vegetables. I've also bought my fall vegetables as well, so I would consider go ahead and doing that. You can get summer flowering bulbs right now. It's definitely too early to plant them, but there's a good selection of those things right now at garden centers and box stores. So I think about go ahead and getting those. Any kind of, I've talked about adding compost to the garden a couple times now. If you're going to buy compost and bag goods and those kinds of things, you might want to consider go ahead and knocking those things out in February before you might be doing other things in the yard, getting those heavy projects done, and also making sure there's availability for those things. With a big return to gardening America's doing right now. So backing up to the vegetable garden again real quickly, it is good to rotate where you're putting things in the garden. So, journaling those things every year if you've never done it before, drawing out a plan for your vegetable garden and where things are going to go. And then the next year, you'll be able to look at that and be able to put the tomatoes in another section and just kind of rotate those things around, maybe even in the yard if you can, is even better, but definitely rotating them in that space. So, planning and journaling these things is a good idea. Also, writing down where you're putting perennials in the ground, because when they go dormant in the wintertime, sometimes it's hard to remember where they were. So just writing down any of these things is good. February is a great month to be planting. If you've got, if there's an arboretum open near you, public gardens open near you, even just going in garden center, even if it's way too early to be purchasing things in your area, or it's earlier than you want to get started, just going and planning and looking at things as you're walking around your neighborhood, seeing what works and what doesn't within a mile or so of where you live is usually a good idea as to the things that are going to work best for you in your yard. And one thing that relates to that is adding additional native plants into your landscape, which are great host plants potentially for caterpillars and for birds and that kind of thing. I do cover lots of Asian plants on this channel, but I do think that we need to have some natives blended into those things to make sure that we not only feed the butterflies, but we also have a place for them to lay their larvae as well. So you don't want to get caught needing your tools later in the spring and not having them prepared. So making sure that your wheelbarrow tire's ready to go, and your the oil's changed in your lawnmower, and you've sharpened the blade on your lawnmower, and sharpened your hand tools and those kinds of things. Definitely February is a great month to knock those things out. That way when you hit March and April and May and you're full on gardening, you won't have to be thinking about those things. So I've got some house plants that look pretty tough and a few things that actually can be divided, and so I'm going to do those things in February, repotting my house plants and just refreshing the soil in them, and probably even fertilizing them before I bring them back out. I won't bring them back out until April, but in February is the month I'm going to get those things, those indoor gardening tasks accomplished. The other thing is if you've got birdhouses in your yard, go ahead and clean them out and get them ready. We're pretty close to that time of year when they're going to come back around and take up residence again. Thank you guys for following along with these monthly checklist videos. I'll be back in March with another one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell notification so that you know when I upload a video. From about February 15th to about February 28th, you will see all of the things that I just mentioned in this video happening in my yard. Thanks for watching.